I thought Mr. Banks did a great job a couple weeks ago in faculty meeting when he gave us his lesson on Nearpod. There was one thing I was a little bit surprised at. He said he gave that same lesson in quiz to his students in a class and they scored above 90%. However, when we took it as a faculty, I can't really remember the exact number, but we were somewhere around 65%. So I feel like we need a little bit of redemption today, a little chance of redemption, and that's what this lesson is about. Hopefully we can get up there somewhere above 90% on this lesson. So a little bit of background on this. If you think about a teaching career of 30 years, I'm only in year 10 right now, so I'm a third of the way done with my teaching career. But and I feel like things are good. I feel like my curriculum is to the point where students are learning. I try to improve things every year. But the thought of doing the same lesson plan over and over and be on repeat kind of gives me anxiety. In fact, when I think about it, I don't even know if I get to year 30, if I'll even care to look both ways when I cross the street. I might even become as crazy as our friend Buddy here, and I hope that's not the case. So what I've tried to do every once in a while is try to mix things up. I know the content that we teach, whether you teach math, English, whatever it is, social studies, history, whatever content area you're in, the content doesn't change, but the way that we present the content to the students can change. And so that's what this lesson is today. I found by going to a conference, the USEC conference that a lot of us go to, I found this new way to present the material to students. It's called Edpuzzle. And so stay with me today. You'll get a little taste of what Edpuzzle is like, but it will score you. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see some question marks. At that point in the lesson, it's going to pause the lesson and you will answer some questions. So please, pay attention. It's going to be a short lesson. We're going to go back to high school chemistry, and I will keep it pretty simple. All you have to do is pay a little bit of attention. I think we'll be okay. So let's get started. We're going to learn today how to balance chemical equations. This is one of the most basic skills in high school chemistry. And by the end of today, hopefully you'll remember or maybe you already know how to balance a chemical equation. So here is a typical chemical equation right here. The most important part of this chemical equation is probably this arrow. This arrow separates the left side from the right side. And in chemistry, we call the left side the reactants. So there's a couple of reactants here. Hydrogen is a reactant. And if we mix that with oxygen, this arrow tells us a chemical reaction took place, and we produce something new. In this case, we produced water, so that is our product. So again, the left side is called the reactants. The right side of the arrow is called the products. We always have to be mindful of where this arrow is. It separates the reactants from the products. So when we balance a chemical equation, this is very important. You must have the same number of atoms on the reactant side as you have on the product side in order to be balanced. So if you've got two hydrogens here, you need to have two hydrogens on the right side or the product side of our equation. We've got two oxygens here. We better have two oxygens on the right. And as you can see, this one is not balanced. So let's go through a quick lesson and show you how to balance a chemical equation. Before we can get right into it, though, we have to review what a chemical formula is. Here's an example of a chemical formula. You see a number out front, and then H2O. So let's talk about this. We're all familiar with water, H2O. But let's make sure we understand a few things before we get to balancing. First of all, how many molecules of water do we have? How many molecules is given by this number right here out front. This number is called a coefficient. This coefficient of 6 tells us there's 6 molecules of water. How many hydrogen atoms? Now if we count the hydrogen atoms, what you've got to do is take the coefficient out front and times it by the subscript right here. 6 times 2 will tell us the number of hydrogen atoms. So 6 times 2 is 12 hydrogen atoms. And finally, how many oxygen atoms do we have here? You take the coefficient again, 6, times it by its existing subscript. Well, you don't see anything here because there's an implied 1. So if we take 6 times 1, we have 6 oxygen atoms. So once we're good with finding out how many molecules and how many atoms are in a chemical formula, then we can start to balance a chemical reaction. So again, just to review, this tells us the number of molecules. You take the coefficient, times it by the subscript, that tells us the total number of atoms. You're going to have to answer a question, your first question, on the next slide. So let's set this up for you. On practice problem number 1, I want you to answer these 3 questions. We're going to be using this formula though. So I want to know how many molecules of CO2, how many atoms that are carbon, and how many oxygen atoms. The video will pause and you can answer those questions. If you do need help, you can always raise your hand. I will come and help you. All right, now we can get into balancing chemical equations. Here's an example, and I would like to run through an example, and then I've got 2 more problems for you to answer. So here's my chemical equation here. We've got C3H8 plus O2, and it makes a couple of products, CO2 and water. Most important thing is to recognize where the arrow is. The reactants is on the left side of the arrow, and the products is on the right side. So if we mix these 2 chemicals together, it's going to produce these 2 products. All right, so most important, we want the same number of atoms on each side. So if you look here, we've got 3 carbons. On this side, on the right side, we've only got 1 so far. You can change the coefficient out front. So I'm going to put a 3 here because 3 times 1 will be 3 carbons. That will make the carbons equal on both sides of the reaction. Hydrogen has got 8 atoms on the left side. We look to the right side of the arrow, and so far we've got 2. So think about what number you could put here, times by 2, that would equal 8. And hopefully we're thinking 4. 4 times 2 is 8. They're balanced, the hydrogens are at this point. Now my oxygens. I've got 2 oxygens on the left side. So far on the right, I've got 3 times 2, which is 6 oxygens, and 4 times 1, which is 4. Well, 6 plus 4 is 10. So I've got 10 oxygens on the right side. I need to get 10 oxygens on the left, so what number times 2 is equal to 10? Will be 5. Okay? And so what you're going to have to do is figure out what the coefficients are here. This is a 1, this one was a 5, this was a 3, and this was a 4. You get the correct numbers for the coefficients, and you will get the question right. Okay, 2 more questions for you, and then we're done. Practice problem number 2 is right here. Here is a chemical equation, and we're going to do this as a class after this. We'll actually do this chemical reaction. I'll show it to you. But before we do that, you've got to balance it on your own and tell me what the correct numbers that go here. When it's balanced, what are the correct coefficients in this sequence? So this one first, this one second, and this one third. Remember, make sure you find that arrow, balance the left side, the reactants, and the products. Again, if you need help, please raise your hand. I will come and help you. Okay, last problem of the lesson. This is a challenge problem. We're going to do this reaction as a class as well after the lesson. But I would like to give you a chance or a crack at this one. This one's more difficult. See if you can balance this chemical equation. And again, I want the correct sequence of coefficients. Make sure you recognize where this arrow is. You want to balance the number on the left from the number on the right. Again, if you need help, please raise your hand. I will help you.